Hi everyone, welcome back. So, how'd it go? Did you write your premise? Did the worksheet help a little bit? Hope so. If you want, I would love to read your premises, and if you want to share them in the comment section, I would love to read them and give feedback. This is so exciting. I'm glad we're doing this together. Okay, so this video is going to be about connecting the dots, and also we're going to focus then a lot on character development. I'm going to also use Michelle Paver's book, Dark Matter, and we're going to talk through the premise for that, and I'll talk a little bit about plot paradigms and structuring your novel and how to do that, break it down actually mathematically by page count. So let's get started. So we're going to look at general sketches now and connecting the dots. And there's this beautiful quote: enter the writing process with a childlike sense of wonder and discovery. Let it surprise you. So one thing we want to do is we want to make a checklist, and we want to list the scenes that we already have in our head. Here's an example from a book I used for one of my classes. In Dreamlander, I took a slightly different approach by writing down the main events in a list format. Number 1, Chris dreams of a woman who warns him to stay in his world and then shoots him. 2, Chris receives strange letters warning him to stay away from the shrink. 3, Chris learns he visits a parallel world when he sleeps. 4, Chris wakes up in Lale in the middle of a battle. So what I want you guys to do is make a list of the scenes that you already have in your head. I think I overshare. I overshare this story a lot, but one thing that I do is in my Word document or a Google Doc, I will make a table of contents. And then each new chapter, I start on a new page and I label that as a heading, which imports it as a title in the table of contents. So if I look at the table of contents, that's my quick overview of my outline of my book. And even if I haven't written the chapter, or even if I don't know what's going to happen in that chapter, I can still give it a title so that I know, mentally and then visually, I know that a certain piece of action has to happen at that point in the story. So I want to go through a checklist of 5 things, and then we will move on to some more detailed information. But you want to give your character a motive, which inevitably extends to a goal, which hopefully then inspires an immediate obstacle, which creates innate conflict. And that's vital to your book and your story. Maybe you've read a book this week, or in the past week or the past month or something. Can you think of what the protagonist's goal was in that book that you read? Did they have motive? Did they have a desire? Did they have goals? Did they have a conflict? And was there an overall theme? Your character's motive is what fuels their desire for something. And this desire, their desire is what gives them a goal to strive towards. So, for example, in Gone with the Wind, much of Scarlett O'Hara's actions in the second half of the movie, second part of the book, are the result of her motive to, quote unquote, never be hungry again. Her desire is for safety and security, and her resultant goal is to gain wealth and status. So that becomes Scarlett O'Hara's goals in the second half, right? Like the goal is to have safety and security. She'll never go hungry again. Creating a solid, memorable character arc is important, right? And there are some ingredients here that that you can follow. So some of those are, start out with a clear idea of who the character is at the beginning of the story. What do they care about and what do they believe? And also, how do they behave in certain and various situations? Open with the character beginning from a place of imperfection or incompleteness. Usually, but not always, a main character's arc will show them growing into a better person. Creating this solid, memorable character arc requires a few different ingredients. So you want to give the reader concrete examples throughout the book, but particularly early on, of the behavior and the beliefs the character needs to change. So if the character is a selfish jerk, maybe they go out of their way to be cruel to a bum on the street. If they're a coward, maybe they cringe, in a closet when someone else is being robbed or beaten. I don't know if you can find a closet in the middle of a street or an alley or whatever, but okay, maybe they cringe or they hide, in a dark doorway if they see somebody being robbed in an alley. Give the character the tools that they need, though, to improve themselves. This can come in the form of, a mentor's advice or even just the character's actions creating a situation that they realize as untenable. Growth needs to be slow and steady throughout the middle of the book. Creating a solid, memorable character arc then, requires some of these things. And let me give you a few more. You want to save the moment of revelation so it coincides with the emotional and physical climax. This isn't always possible, but when you can bring the climaxes of the outer and the inner journeys together, the result can be really explosive. Prove the character's inner changes through their actions. It's not enough to have them, vow to be a better person. They have to prove it to the reader. Sometimes you can find a nice parallelism by reversing their earlier actions, for example. So if they were cruel to that bum on the street, or they, hid in the in the closet in the alley, in the dark doorway in the alley, maybe they are faced with a very similar situation again, and then they act differently, and thereby proving to the reader that that these inner changes have taken place. Conflict fuels fiction, and frustration fuels conflict. Every time the character and the reader begins to think victory and happiness are just around the corner, you as the author, you have to find a way to circumvent that character achieving it. How can you keep the stakes as high as possible for your readers? You want to watch for lags. If you find your character happy or at peace, chances are good that your character isn't frustrated. Unless you're using a temporary lull in the storm to emphasize the disasters to come, you want to avoid these quiet, happy scenes. Not only do they interrupt the dramatic flow, but they also tend to become or be boring. Write a list of the 10 worst things that could happen to your character. Jot down all your ideas, no matter how far out they are. If you haven't come up with anything feasible by the end of the list, then just write 10 more. Just keep brainstorming. So long as the characters are always guessing, you can always keep the readers in the same state of suspense. Vary the intensity. Don't get so caught up in the need for frustration that you forget the importance of variety. Even the most thrilling sort of race 'em, chase 'em, shoot 'em up scenes will grow boring and lose focus if they aren't interspersed with these low key sort of sequel scenes. Frustration doesn't always have to be, this code red alert. Sometimes it can be this niggling murmur or something like that. And then evaluate your scenes for frustration. Take a glance at your outline and make note of what is frustrating the character in each scene. If you can't find a frustration, or if the source of the frustration seems weak, go ahead, go back to your list and, your list of 10 worst things, and use that to start sort of bolstering the frustration. You can also use personality clashes. Craft characters who naturally push each other's buttons. That's really fun. You'll often see this with like mother-daughter relationships. They love each other, but they're always pushing each other's buttons. Maybe you can incorporate unexpected situations. For example, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Um, what about high stakes? One of the easiest ways to raise the stakes is to create a tight timeline for your story. So no one did that better than Alfred Hitchcock, right? Because he always introduced the ticking time bomb. And what Hitchcock said was, if you show the audience the time bomb, then you increase the suspense. They know the bomb is going to explode. Have you recently watched Chernobyl, for example, on Netflix? As you're watching Chernobyl, you know Chernobyl is going to happen because we are where we are on the timeline. We know Chernobyl happened, right? And we know how bad it was. But watching a show where the characters don't know that Chernobyl is going to be as devastating as it was, that actually gives the audience, that gives us this heightened sense of tension, knowing that it's going to happen. So you can include, this ticking time bomb, a countdown, some kind of time limit or time deadline to raise the stakes. Remember, there are inner and outer battles. So every scene can include, this outer battle where there's physical reaction to a conflict, but there's also an inner battle, the psychological and emotional reaction to events. So you can use that as well. And also balance, using foreshadowing and tension, build your conflict at a steady rate of increase until you reach the high point of the climax. Okay, and then we have theme. Once you figure out like what the main character's internal conflict is, ask that question. And when you have, the answer to that in your outlining process, this will, drive the entire story. Which of the main character's views will change as a result of the story's events, and how and why? Ask yourself these questions. This is where you're going to find the underlying force of your theme. Your character's views will define their actions, and their actions will define the story. Another question would be, how will the main character demonstrate their respective views and attitudes at the beginning and the end of the story? This is an extension to the previous question, but it's vital because, as we discussed earlier, its answers will prove the changes to the reader. Is there a particular symbolism that can reinforce the theme and the character's attitude toward it? Like theme itself, symbolism is often overstated and generally better when culled organically from your unconscious mind. For example, sometimes you'll find yourself using a particular color or image to represent something. If the symbol proves effective, you can later go back and strengthen it. Another question, how can you use the subtext, the unstated, to exemplify the theme, so you won't have to actually spell it out for the reader. When it comes to theme, the unstated is almost always as powerful or more powerful than, the direct, stating it directly. In real life, when we find ourselves learning lessons and changing views, we can't always define the changes in precise language. And, neither should your character. So keep that in mind as well when it comes to theme. Your character's backstory should feel to you that it doesn't end where the story proper begins. It needs to still be there under the surface. And if it's strong enough, it will help immeasurably in creating a powerful story. So this class, we want to focus on ballasting your character's backstory, the unseen history that informs your character's decisions and actions, and the importance to the progression and consistency of the story. You will also now develop in-depth character interviews using freehand and enneagrams. So let's develop the backstory for your character and come up with an idea for the inciting incident, and explore the influence of other characters on your main character. You can also conduct character interviews, and for this, you can use the character worksheet that I'm providing for you. Freehand and enneagrams identify, your character's fatal flaws as well. So right now you should have your premise and you should have a general scene list. And then after the rest of this class, you should be able to develop an inciting incident. You should be able to write a general statement about your main character and maybe some other characters as well. Explore the influencing characters in your protagonist's life. Explore your character's education, jobs, and travel. Explore your character's personal epics. Interview your character. Write a freehand interview of your character and use the Enneagram to identify your character's personality and fatal flaws. So we're going to look really quickly at a worksheet that I created, and it's called Dark Matter. Let me just get over there. Dark Matter, a ghost story. And this is a book that's written by Michelle Paver, and I want to talk about the premise here, and then we're going to look at some important components. And those components are premise, plot paradigm, scene list, and character sketch. And then after we do that, we'll go over to talk about enneagrams and the different kinds of character archetypes. So here we are. This is Dark Matter, a ghost story. This is the premise for one of my favorite books, I would say. And you'll see at the top, of course, I have the title. And then I have 5 images. First, you have the situation. Second, you see that the character has to make a choice. Third, you see the character has to go on a journey. Fourth, the character sees a ghost. And then fifth, there's a question of survival. So let's read this. January 1937. Clouds of war are gathering over a fog-bound London. 28-year-old Jack is poor, lonely, and desperate to change his life. So when he's offered the chance to join an Arctic expedition, he jumps at it. Spirits are high as the ship leaves Norway. 5 men and 8 huskies crossing the Barents Sea by the light of the midnight sun. At last they reach the remote, uninhabited bay where they will camp for the next year, Gruhuken. But the Arctic summer is brief. As night returns to claim the land, Jack feels a creeping unease. One by one, his companions are forced to leave. He faces a stark choice: stay or go. Soon he will see the last of the sun as the polar night engulfs the camp in months of darkness. Soon he will reach the point of no return, when the sea will freeze, making escape impossible. Grühüken is not uninhabited. Jack is not alone. Something walks there in the dark. ... Okay, so I don't know about you, but it gives me some chills there at the end when I read this. It really gives a sense of impending doom. This is a really great premise for a book. Of course, I'm biased because I love the book. But if we take this book and we look at plot construction, which is what I want to talk to you guys about more. So, what I've done here is I have taken multiple plot paradigms and put them together to sort of fit this book's story structure. So, you'll see there in this rectangular box, there's backstory. And the backstory is everything about Jack and the other characters that we may not know, but Michelle Paver knew when she was writing this book. But the story starts on page 1, right? So there's a green arrow here where it says story starts here. There's a green arrow on the other side, story ends here. So even though you have one book and you have, from page 1 to page 300, and you only are going to share those pages with your reader, there's still a backstory and there's still a story that will come after the last page of the book. So you can keep those in mind as bookends or a framework for the actual pages that you will share with your audience. So we have, a traditional structure here: Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And then you can see this horizontal ascending line that is the rising tension. And then I have marked plot points and midpoints. And you can see here that I've used lightning bolts for the 3 big ones, the 2 big plot points and the 1 main midpoint. But I've also included tiny little lightning bolts that show other smaller plot points or shifts in the story. Okay, so here in the dark blue squares, it says, stories begin on the day things are different. And then something happens to sweep the character into a new reality, and she wants something. So here you're going to introduce your character's desires. This can be riches, it can be professional accomplishment, it can be love, it can be a multitude of things. And then an opposing force means that she doesn't have what she wants, so she has to find ways to try to get it. But it's difficult, and she encounters setbacks. And then the next one says, it appears that all is lost. So this is the dark night of the soul, if you will. This is where the character thinks that either they will die or they can't go on, or this is the point where they do not believe that they will actually reach their goal. But the main character battles the opposing force and wins. Or alternatively, they lose, which would then make the book a tragedy. So this is just a very simple plot construction, but it's something that you can use to outline and sketch your own book. So you can see also at the top here in gray, you have 0 to 25% of the book, 25 to 50, 51 to 75, 76 to 100. And generally speaking, for a 300-page novel, then each one of these acts or quarters is broken into page numbers. So you have your setup from page 1 to 75, and somewhere around page 75, you're going to hit your major first plot point. Then you'll have your first half of the second act, and this is on pages 76 to 150. Somewhere around 150, you're going to hit the midpoint where another huge revelation happens and sends the character in another direction. Then you have the second half of the second act, and this is pages 150 to 225, and this is leading you up to the second major plot point where you see then in between page 225 and 226, somewhere around that area, you're going to hit this major plot point. Tension is still going to increase until you reach your climax, and then you have a resolution. This green line that ascends here with tension can, of course, change, right? So the climax could come, a few pages earlier, or it can come later, and you can have a much shorter resolution. Okay, so this is a checklist that I made for the scenes. So this is so that I can show you a little bit about how dark matter sort of how it breaks down into scenes and then page numbers. So the first scene, we have a letter. The second scene is from Jack's diary. He meets someone in a pub. He goes to the Grand Hotel in Tromsø, sets out on the Barents Sea, and the arrival at Gruhuken, where the captain reveals some information. And then we hit plot point 1, where the ghost is first seen. And that happens, between pages 79 and 86. And that's our first plot point, and that sends us into the second act. The second act, we have dramatic context, and so we see sort of this routine and the work, and we meet some other characters. We see one character whom we don't really like very much, gutting a seal while it's still alive. There's also then the daylight countdown, and the daylight countdown increases the tension dramatically because we know that on, I can't remember the exact date, October 16th, that the sun is not going to rise above the Arctic horizon anymore. So as soon as, we get to that, we start this countdown, and as soon as we hear of this countdown, the tension immediately increases because no light means no travel. It means, the oncoming of the ice. And so the workers, the ship's crew, and our main character, Jack, are going to be stuck where they are until the Arctic winter ends. Around page 104 and 107, finally, there's an admission of, I've seen it too. I've also seen the ghost. Then there's appendicitis, where more of the ship's crew leave, and they're getting out right before everything freezes over. Then we have, on page 124, we have the midpoint, and this is where, we see the work routine, the routine of living, and the feeling of complete isolation. As we move to the next scene, Jack is trying to send out transmissions. He sees someone, and there's, terror of the darkness that's growing. Page 139, the next scene, Gus and Algie, they're not only not coming back, but they also start to read information about superstitions. And then we have the dog runs away. Jack also gets lost in the snow. He encounters a ghost. And he hears all of these creepy sounds. And here he's really losing his connection to the outside world. Then he runs into a trapper, and then, on page 210 to 232, we get a chapter, quote, the endless black inhuman rage. So the dogs are gone, Isaac comes back into the hut, and the ghost attacks increase. So it's highly dramatic and really stressful. And that leads us all the way to the second plot point. And we get to Act 3, which is the resolution where the rescue boat comes. But even as they are leaving this place, somebody falls in to the ocean and there's a death. And in the very end, in resolution, our main character moves to South America. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how you could break down your own scene list and insert plot points um, so that you can visualize them. Anything else here of importance? I think that's about it for now. Let's head back over to our PowerPoint presentation and we'll quickly go over Enneagrams. So the Enneagram, this is super cool because it gives us 9 different character archetypes. So let's just get right to it and talk about them. Number 1 is the reformer. This is a strict perfectionist. They're conscientious, perfectionist, critical, and controlled. Do you know anyone like this? This is the rational, idealistic type. They're very principled, purposeful, self-controlled, and perfectionistic. Number 2 is the helper. The helper is, a very considerate character, the caring, interpersonal type, demonstrative, generous, people-pleasing, and possessive. And number 3 is the achiever. So if before I get into that description, if you look at the circle, you're also going to see that there are 3 centers. So there's a feeling center, that's number 2, 3, and 4. There's a thinking center, that's number 5, 6, and 7. And then there's an action center, so number 8, number 9, and number 1. So number 1, the reformer, this is action based. Okay, number 3, the achiever, which is a feeling center. The success oriented, pragmatic type, adaptive, excelling, driven, and image conscious. So the achiever, is competitive, ambitious, and focused, and they can also be shrewd. So you have both positive and negative traits here, which is interesting, right? Number 4 is the individualist. And this is an intense, creative character. The sensitive, withdrawn type, expressive, dramatic, self-absorbed, and temperamental. So they're deep and emotional and creatively expressive. And now we're moving into the thinking center. So number 5 is the investigator. So this is the intense cerebral type. They're perceptive and innovative, also secretive, and can be isolated. So cerebral, private, curious, and detached. Number 6 is the loyalist. So number 6 is the loyal skeptic, the committed, security-oriented type. They're engaging and responsible. They're also anxious and suspicious. So this type of character is cautious and alert. Okay. Number 7 is the enthusiast. The busy, fun-loving type. They're spontaneous, they're versatile, but they're also distractible and scattered. Do you know someone like this? This can be a visionary. someone who is optimistic, spontaneous, uninhibited, and keen. Okay, number 8 is the challenger. So this is the powerful, dominating type. They're self-confident and decisive and willful and confrontational. Again, number 8, now we've moved into the action center. So this is someone who's self-assured and assertive and decisive and direct. And then number 9 is the peacemaker. They're adaptive. They're the easygoing, self-effacing type. They're receptive, reassuring, agreeable, and then, potentially one of their vulnerabilities is that they are complacent. So you can use these different character archetypes or character personalities to develop your characters further. What I really like about this is that, it's giving you the positive traits of your character, but then it's also giving you, maybe the negative trait that balances out the positive ones. So if you head over to the Google Doc worksheet for character sketches, you'll see that, this is, how many pages is this? 4 pages. But you have your basics. What's your manuscript title? What's your character's name and nickname? Where do they live? What do they do? What do they want? What's their moral code? Are they a hero, a sympathetic protagonist, an anti-hero, a villain, or a supervillain? What's their background? Where were they born? What's their religion? What's their status? What about their parents or siblings? Any educational background, professional background? Then there's a section on their appearance and mannerisms and relationships. Do they have a partner, a friend, a best friend, a confidant, a mentor, an enemy? And then personality. What's their personality like? What are their primary and secondary traits? What are their counter and contrasting traits? What about their vulnerabilities and their major flaws? Are they introverted or extroverted? Have they suffered a major trauma? What's their temperament like? What is their reaction to adversity? And how do they behave when they're happy or sad or angry or excited? What about life regrets? What about their biggest dreams? What about their secrets from their past? So all of those questions are put here in the worksheet that you can go through and answer them all for not only your protagonist, but you could do this again for your antagonist and any other secondary characters in your story. So now here we are. We are at the section where you're going to go off and you are going to write your character sketch. And so head on over to the Google Doc, make a copy of your own, save it into your own Google Drive, and you can use that worksheet and that template as often as you like for not just the book that you're writing over the next few weeks here, but maybe you want to use it in the future for future books and stories to develop your characters. So here are all the things that we want to do now. We want to summarize or list all the scenes that you're currently aware of, highlight any area in need of further development. Fill in the blanks between the scenes, so connect the dots, and you can do this by asking questions. Go ahead and free write. Can you free write and ignore spelling and grammar mistakes? Just write. Identify your physical reaction to your good and your bad ideas. So if you have like a bored reaction or a negative reaction, you might want to consider removing that piece of information. Identify your character's motives, desires, and goals. Decide how you can frustrate your character's desires and goals to create conflict. Make a list of the antagonistic forces that will counter your protagonist and identify the themes that are already present in your story, and then select the most prominent one and decide how you can strengthen it throughout the story. Keep your eyes open for possible symbols also that you can use to reinforce your theme. And that's it. Oh, that was a long tape or video, right? Tape. That was a long video, but I hope it gave you some insight into character creation and also developing your story structure and how to break it down for a novel, and also inserting some plot points and conflict. Okay, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys and hearing about how your characters have developed, and I will see you for the next video. Bye!